it came back to the same approaches as the ballet world. Do it this way or don't do it. And I started to see a dynamic that I really didn't like, a power over dynamic where the instructor is the end all, know all, be all.
Welcome back to the Mindful Trainer podcast. I'm your host, Melanie Webb, and I'm here to guide you behind the scenes and into the minds of athletes, coaches, guides, and trainers who have battled through obstacles to accomplish their goals. In part 2 of my conversation with Amie Kane-Lee, we dive deeper into her career transition from professional ballet to Pilates, exploring the legacy of Joseph Pilates, the unregulated world of Pilates instruction, and how asking questions can transform your approach to movement. I've been in the fitness industry for over 25 years, and I still learned a lot from this episode. I wonder if you'll be surprised by what you hear. We're going to pick up where we left off in episode 12. Are you ready? Here we go.
So that is learned. It's learned how to be quiet, not question, do what you're told, make your body shape into what we want it to be, or else you don't have a job.
Okay, I think that's a good foundation. And you laid the groundwork. You help us understand this background that you come from as a professional.
Mm-hmm.
So take us back to being on stage and knowing that that's going to be your last performance. Where do we go from there? I can only imagine the identity crisis, the foundational shaking realization that was. And what's next? You're 21, 22 years old?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, to retire at 22 is wild. And really, I think anybody
Mhm.
listening who maybe is thinking about retirement, at 60, I don't know what the retirement age is now, but for dancers, it's often in their 20s. Some dancers are lucky to make it to 40. There's a dancer right now I just saw, she's with the National Ballet of Canada. She's incredible and she's 44. She has 2 children and wow, this woman is incredible. Um, but the reality is just like NFL players, you get a couple years in as a professional and you're done. It was this quiet whisper, I think you may be done. I think this is it. And it was on stage. And um, at that point, I decided to move to New York. And I felt like New York would be a great place because I could maybe get back into the dance world. In New York, you can go and take classes at a lot of studios with incredible teachers. So I could be as involved in the dance world as I wanted to be or physically could be. Um, and I could launch into a new career in New York City, which is just the best place to launch into a new career, in my opinion. I love New York. So I'd always wanted to live in New York as a kid. So New York that's where I went. And I got there. I had already gotten certified in mat Pilates. So I had already received my mat Pilates certification. And so I was talking to a studio in New York. They were doing a training program and they really wanted me to join and then start teaching at the studio once I've gone through my certification education program. So I moved to New York in, I believe it was July of 2001. And I think we all know what
Oh.
happened in September 11th. Was a newbie in New York City.
Oh, I didn't realize the timing of
Yeah,
that for you. I knew you were there, but I didn't know how long you had been there.
it was months. And I had firmly established myself as a New Yorker. I had my routine. I loved it. Yes. And so so September 11th happened And I think that's a whole nother conversation. So
Yes.
we could put a pin on that. But that experience, like millions of people, really changed me. And it changed me in a brand new city at the time where I am going through the ending of my prior career. So it was emotionally a lot. So we'll come back to that another time. The I loved going through my Pilates training. I loved it. It was a way for me to move my body, think about mechanics, like biomechanics. How's our body moving? How can I take my experience in the ballet world and apply it to helping other people move their body in a way that felt really good. So I dove into that, and soon the curiosity that I had been raised with from my parents and my grandparents as teachers started to bubble to the surface. And I started getting really curious about exercise. I started getting curious about the difference between exercise for health and movement for show, movement for performance. And those are two very different things. And I started asking questions. Why are we doing this stretch this way? The mechanics, like the hip socket isn't shaped that way. I just started asking questions, and I was fired from the studio for insubordination.
For insubordination.
Insubordination.
Like that was
That was,
communicated to you and told to you that that was the reason you were fired.
yes. Uh, but there was no clarification on what, what what I had done exactly. It's just insubordination. So I was stunned. I didn't understand. And I was depressed for quite a long time. And I finally had to go and get it. I had to get out of the house and go start again. So I found a studio in the East Village that I loved, and I still am friends with one of my colleagues that I love her, and she and I both come from a dance background, and we just were super curious together in the studio. So I grew a lot as a teacher at that point. But I was still asking a lot of questions, and eventually my body it started to I started to realize that this thing that I was doing for my own strength building and rehab was actually hurting me. And I started realizing, like, this is not, maybe Pilates isn't good for me. And that was a really, really hard thing to ask, because everybody at that time, especially everybody, was saying, do Pilates, do Pilates, do Pilates. You need to stretch more. You need to lengthen this tissue more. You need to, your foot keeps breaking because it's not pliable enough. So stretch it, stretch it, stretch it. And so I did. And then I kept getting more and more and more injured. And eventually, I was walking down the street in New York, and another bone broke in my foot, just walking down the street.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And so it was at that point that I really started to question what what I was doing. And so I got my personal training certification because I thought, well, if Pilates isn't giving me the answers I need to start looking elsewhere. So I got my personal training certification through NASM, and um and it was great, and I loved it, and it answered a lot of questions. But then my physical therapist actually introduced me to muscle activation techniques, and it it was a game game changer for me. It was exactly what I needed at that time for my body. MAT, muscle activation techniques, has gone through a variety of changes throughout the last couple decades. The way that that technique was applied at the time for me was exactly what my body needed. It's changed at this point a little bit, but so I decided I'm going to do this. I want to learn what all of this is about. And so during that training program, which was about a year, I learned almost every single muscle in the body. And we looked at not only the muscle and the origin and attachments, but we looked at how the joint moves and how a particular muscle can influence a joint at any point in a range of motion and depending on the force that's being applied to the joint. So we took anatomy to a whole nother level. And then that led me, I'm just giving my whole bullet points of my career here. And that led me into resistance training specialist, RTS, which is physics, really, for the human body and the equipment, understanding the equipment and resistance and how that is applied to the body. And that just changed everything for me. So eventually, I was able to take all of these tools and start to formulate what's the goal. And then, based on what is the goal, how can we be strategic about what we're doing? And that time through MAT and RTS and um, I really put Pilates to in the back burner. I really said, I'm done with this industry, this part of the industry for a while.
And can I, so as a non-Pilates instructor myself over here, can I drill down into the why of that decision and
Yeah.
take us into, so what you're talking about now with your MAT and the RTS, and these are concepts that those of us who studied exercise sciences in a more college institution, like
Mhm,
classes like kinesiology or biomechanics or motor
mhm.
learning, right? And so these are certifications that professionals can pursue while you're working these educational models,
Right.
continuing education credits, if you will. So you've been adding to your skill set. Um, and as you do, essentially you start realizing there's more questions to be asked about this method that you had been involved in, the Pilates method. So and you mentioned what sounds to me like a very customizable, personalized approach to achieving a goal. Like that goal, by that you mean, I'm assuming, what is the individual in front of you presenting with? That
Yes.
client coming to you, what is that goal and what is that body
Mhm.
presenting with, the history that comes along with that person. And now you have a different tool set and an expanded toolkit to address the individuality of that person in front of you.
Yes.
So, what was it about Pilates that caused you to put it on the back burner once you had these additional toolkits?
It's a it's a tricky conversation. So, this is where we get real.
Yeah, and I just want to say, like, this is the difficulty in the conversation. This is where different thinking processes come into play, right? When you start to question a system as a person from within that system, and I don't care where you're experiencing this, it can be within a family system, it can be within a workplace culture. I've bumped into that a number of times throughout my career, and now we're talking about an entire industry, and depending on how that industry is constructed to begin with and its origins and how willing it is to have conversations, I think depends on how they react to individuals within that system asking the questions. You could be labeled an enemy of the state, essentially,
Yes.
rather than someone who you're like, I'm in here, I'm invested. My heart and soul has put hours and years into this. And I'm asking this question because I would like us to do better.
Yes, because I care.
But some places
Yes.
don't, depending on that power construct. I think that's how systems respond. I mean, you've already been
Mhm.
fired once for being insubordinate,
Yes.
which sounds really militaristic to me.
It does. Yes. There's so much to this. Yes. So I I think by nature I'm a systems thinker. I'm not trained in that, but I am a systems thinker. I want to understand how everything influences everything and how somebody's prior work experience may influence the language that they use in their new work environment, for example. So let's start with what is the system of Pilates. So Joseph Pilates was born in either 1880 or 1883. There, the documentation seems to fudge a few numbers. So 1880, 1883 in Germany, was apparently an asthmatic kid. He struggled with his health, and he was growing up at a time in Germany where physical culture was a thing. So they would go outside and they would do, you know, gymnasiums were opening, and the idea of health was part of German culture at the time. And that really influenced Joseph Pilates. There are a lot of myths and legends about this man. There's a lot of legends that come with how he got to the States and how he got to New York City and started this system of exercise. We do know, though, that he moved to London, and while he was in London, World War I broke out, and German nationals were placed into internment camps. And he spent some time in an internment camp on the Isle of Man, and his time there at the camp really influenced who he is. And eventually he got on a boat, he went to New York City, and he opened up a studio for for New Yorkers with this idea of this physical culture, a gymnasium environment that he had experienced and grew up in Germany. And so that made its way to New York City. He designed some incredible equipment, and, I've seen old pictures of this equipment, and it's really cool. He used springs. One of the legends is that he took springs from the infirmary beds in the internment camp and attached them in ways so that people could exercise while at this camp. Now, that is in question, but I think it whether or not it's true, I don't know. Uh, but it gives, excuse me, it paints us a picture of really what he was trying to do, which is get people exercising, get people moving, breathing, vigorous, work. That was the culture that he came from, and he really wanted to introduce that into New York City, into the States, and he believed everybody should be doing this system of exercises that he designed. There, he wrote to presidents to try and get it into schools. I mean, he was really aggressive, and it took a long time for this method to actually make its way into popular culture like it has now, but it has, and I kinda think he would be happy about that.
Yeah, it's
With
quite
that,
a legacy, if you will.
a legacy. His legacy is turning into really what he wanted. However, there's always a however. However, in that time, y those decades that have passed, that have gone on from the time he passed away to now, the idea of what Pilates is has changed into something very different. I was lucky being in New York because I got to work alongside of people that had a variety of experience with Pilates. There were people that were very hardcore. This is exactly what Joseph Pilates said. This is exactly how we're going to do it. This is the type of equipment that he designed at the time with the same materials that he designed them with using.
Oh,
So no modern day materials. This is what he wanted. This is how we're going to do it by the book.
that's incredible.
Yes, it is preserving his legacy in a very specific way. It is, if we take it back to the ballet world, it is preserving this one style of ballet, one style of Pilates. And I think that's really important. Along the way, right when I was becoming certified when I was in New York, people started branching off and started questioning, well, could we maybe create some equipment that uses modern day materials? Could we take these exercises and maybe create some modifications, change things in a way to make it more accessible and more, quote, contemporary? And that is the style that I was trained and educated in. So, a very contemporary approach to the modern day teachings to like this very classical way of teaching. I don't know if that made sense, but they changed it, they reshaped it. That eventually went to court, and a federal
Oh,
judge
that's
had to
right.
make yes,
There were battles
yes.
within,
There were
yeah. Like, who has the
about
right to use the name Pilates? So didn't that have something to do with
correct.
it?
Yeah.
And I remember I've asked you this before because you contributed some amazing floor Pilates content to my web well in
Oh.
our library of exercises and movement library. And I remember asking you, is Pilates spelled with a capital P or a little p? Should I be using a trademark or registered? I don't know the answer to this.
Yeah.
I think that's when I learned about that.
Yeah. There was a lawsuit. A federal judge ultimately ruled that Pilates is a household name, that it could be used freely. And so that set off a just a frenzy of new styles, new equipment, new ways of thinking about this exercise method, which then caused a lot of people to get really angry and understandably protective of Joseph Pilates' legacy. And that is still at play. That is still happening. And this first lawsuit was, maybe 25-ish years ago. And we're still battling about this question of what is Pilates. Let me back up a little bit. Unlike personal training, Pilates is a very unregulated industry, part of the fitness industry. Personal training, we go through my personal training certification is through ACE, and when I got that certification, it was so hard.
Yeah, it's a hard test.
It's hard. And Pilates teachers do not learn, and I'm going to be very broad here, and I know that it's not every certification, so forgive me for those certifications out there who do teach this. Please pardon that. But generally speaking, Pilates does not teach exercise science, does not teach mechanics, does not teach biomechanics. There are some certifications that do not teach anatomy and that will flat out say you don't need to know anatomy to teach this method. They don't motor learning, neuroscience, teaching styles, communication. No, it is a very this is the choreography. This is the order in which you do it. These are the spring settings. Go.
Which is equal
Prep.
to tension? Spring
Yes,
settings?
spring
Resistance?
settings.
Okay.
It's tension. It's an elastomer, so you could think of it like tubing or exercise band.
Okay.
Stretches, tension increases and decreases, and That's how the resistance is formed, is through that increase and decrease of spring tension. And for example, when I went through my Pilates certification, the equipment was explained. Here's the carriage, here's the foot bar, here are the springs, here's the strap or rope, depending on the brand of equipment. There's a pulley, here's the handles. That there was no explanation of what I just clarified to you. Spring tension, um, spring tension is not always the same as resistance. The resistance profile, none of that was explained. We didn't even learn that a pulley's job is to redirect. We didn't learn about any type of equipment analysis, which is very different than personal training, where you learn about Newton's laws. And it's a very different type of education program that is really focused on this is the choreography for the exercises, this is how many you do, this is how you do it, but with complete disregard for everything else that goes at play. Whether or not you acknowledge that there's an injury that may need some modification, that injury still exists. And in the Pilates world, it was always do it this way or don't do it. So really, it came back to the same approaches as the ballet world. Do it this way or don't do it. And I started to see a dynamic that I really didn't like, a power over dynamic where the instructor is the end all, know all, be all, and the student on the reformer does it. And I didn't like that at all. And I started feeling very uncomfortable, unsafe, unheard. Like my injuries were not taken into consideration at all. There was no wiggle room with it. And so I left. Even as yeah, it's a big story, Melanie.
It is a big story. I'm so glad you're here telling it because you're reminding me of some pieces of history that I might have bumped up against 20 years ago, but have long since forgotten.
Yeah.
Um, and and the contrast you're painting, I just want to put a pin in this for everybody between the methodology of a personal trainer versus an instructor of a method.
Yes.
Like, I hear you say the word choreography, and again, I have not spent a lot of time in a Pilates studio on the
Mhm.
reformer, like, I think 1 or 2 classes when we were at the Sports Club LA. While I'm a big fan of the Pilates floor method, and I use it often and much with my clients. But yeah, the choreography idea versus the personalized approach is
Yes.
that's what I'm hearing is a really important takeaway.
Yeah. And this gets tricky. So I can see because I've been in both worlds and am in both worlds, I can really a and I have very good friends in both worlds. I can see both sides. Pilates teachers as a whole, I mean, first of all, if you go into Pilates, teaching Pilates, it is from your heart. So, this is a method that feels good for people. It feels good to move in these ways. And people want to offer that. So, it comes from a place of love and a place of wanting to help people. The way that the Pilates training is designed is what I have a big problem with. And it's what I have now from the outside I can see where there are issues with the training. Pilates teachers really believe that they are doing the right thing for people and that they are keeping people safe, that they are doing what they were trained to do. And I really believe that. They are doing what they were trained to do. Now, there are some rogue instructors that are completely with outside their scope of practice. So that's something to look out for. There are rogue instructors, I'll just say.
Just like there are some rogue trainers and
Absolutely.
certainly some rogue fitness influencers on social
Yes.
media, which we discuss all the time, and I
Yes.
get very offended when someone calls me a fitness influencer because I'm like, "I'm not
Don't
excuse me?
put me in that box.
Excuse me, I
Yes.
spent, like,
Yeah.
decades studying this. There's a difference
Yeah.
here." But and not they still are passionate about what they're doing, and they love it, and they're out there to share it.
Right. Right.
Fantastic.
Fantastic. Yes. Is it getting people exercising and moving their bodies?
Yes.
Yes. Can it also be very, very dangerous? Yes.
Yes.
So the hours that go into a Pilates teacher training program are in the hundreds.
Is that
It
right?
is no joke. It is hundreds and hundreds of hours that go into this training. What's different though is that in Pilates training, you some training programs start out with a history of Joseph Pilates and how we got here. And then they start with the mat work and then reformer and then there's the Cadillac, the chair, the barrels, and all of these different pieces of equipment make up the full system. And one thing to note right now, reformer Pilates is having its moment.
Oh, yes, it is.
Yes, and people call it reformer Pilates. That is one piece of equipment. It is like going into the gym and using the cable machine for your entire workout. Can you get an entire workout on a cable machine? Yeah,
Sure.
you can. You can. You're also missing the opportunity for a lot of other pieces of equipment and a lot of other ways to challenge your body, challenge your brain. So, the reformer Pilates that's making this surge out there in the world is great. It's also not the full picture.
The Mindful Trainer is the official podcast of WebWell. I'm your host, Melanie Webb. I'm also the founder and master trainer at WebWell. To learn more about WebWell and all we have to offer, please visit webwell.com. Well, this wraps up part 2 of my conversation with former professional ballet dancer and Pilates instructor, Amie Kane-Lee. Next time, in part 3 of The Problem with Pilates, we'll explore how Amie applies her advanced education and personalized training toolkit to real clients and what it takes to move safely, effectively, and intentionally. You won't want to miss it. See you next time.